Hello, everyone. My name is David Kepper, and on behalf of Neill, Aguiluz, David Bowe, Thompson Murray, Tommy Piglia, and Jenn Wilcox, I'm going to introduce you all to our 7-3 Distillery market entry analysis. In 2015, a small batch distiller of American spirits arrived on the scene in America's most interesting city, New Orleans. 7-3 Distillery got its name from the 73 neighborhoods that make up the historic heart of its hometown. Each spirit is made with locally farmed ingredients to bring the freshest flavor to each distinctive spirit. Their product ranges include vodka, the St. Roch vodka and the St. Roch cucumber vodka, gin, the Gentilly gin and the barrel reserve Gentilly gin, rum, the Black Pearl rum, whiskey, and bourbon, the Irish Channel whiskey and the Bywater bourbon. 7-3 Distillery has one simple goal: to capture the unmistakable flavor of this one-of-a-kind American city by crafting spirits with a sense of place. And now we're going to jump into the SWOT analysis. The company's strength lies in its brand. From the typeface to the taste, each product is designed start to finish to impart the essence of a neighborhood of New Orleans. The classically trained master distiller combines solid distilling fundamentals with an experimental process that generates products distinct from the rest of the market. These products have been winning gold medals on the national stage for years. The main weakness of 7-3 Distilling at this time is that it's purely a local brand. Its production is limited to small batch runs, and its distribution is constrained to the state of Louisiana. Now, however, these weaknesses can be leveraged into opportunities if the small batch process can be proceduralized. Once they perfect their distilling techniques, and once these techniques are standardized, the correct financing and an increased production line capacity could position the company for an aggressive expansion push. Now, the threats within the international liquor industry are far too numerous to mention within the scope of this report, but however, the power is consolidated with a few firms in that space. Diageo, United Spirits Limited, Pernod Ricard, Suntory Beam, and Bacardi dominate international distribution. These behemoths would not look too kindly on new entrants to established markets, and can be expected to pivot against any threat that obtains a foothold in the market. However, while name brands dominate the international sales from a volume perspective, the demand for small batch distilled products is strong both within the US market and abroad. Also, if 7-3 Distilling were to gain a foothold, they could become an attractive acquisition for the brand portfolio of any of these large distributors.
So the first spirit analyzed here is the 73 Distillery's vodka product line, consisting of the St. Roch vodka and the St. Roch cucumber vodka, among other products. And so by determining the global target markets for vodka, 73 Distillery will be able to determine their recommended growth strategies on a global stage. And we will target Russia and Poland as the opportunities for global growth in this market. So to begin, the economic opportunity for Russia and Poland, why they were chosen. As you can see on the screen, the countries who consume the most vodka around the world, Russia and Poland, are at the top of the list. Russia was ranked as the leading country in vodka consumption per capita in the world, with an average monthly consumption of shots per person per month to be 17. So the population and forecasted growth of Russia and Poland. So as noted on the previous slide, the average Russia consumes 17 shots of vodka per month. The current Russian population is about 145 million people. So if you do a little bit of math here, you can come to the conclusion that there is about 2.4 billion shots of vodka consumed in Russia per month. So obviously the population and growth potential here is huge. The Polish population is about 38 million people, and the growth projections across Europe are expected to maintain relative stability, although may dip in the next couple decades, but will relatively stay the same around these figures for 2020. So the economic market of Russia and Poland. So the two graphics on the right of your screen show the projected growth of total GDP for Russia and Poland. Although it's not expected to be a huge boom over the next 5 years, you will see a steady GDP growth, with the only negative GDP growth being due to the COVID pandemic. The massive consumption in this market leads one to conclude there is an opportunity to capture market share, especially considering, as we just discussed, that there is about 2.4 billion shots of vodka consumed in Russia alone per month. So the retail consumption and competition So first, the Russian alcohol market is one of the country's major economic drivers and is the largest spirit export for the Russian economy. And therefore, due to the size and consumption factors, there's a lot of competition. This competition includes the Rodnik Distillery, the Moscow Distillery, and the Russian Standard. And likewise with Poland, the competitors also have to you have to overcome these strong competitors that are already embedded in the markets and the strong affiliation, culturally speaking, to them, such as Vasky, Belverde, and Zoltakwa Gorska. So 73 Distillery will have to consider the competitive factors when deciding whether this is a market they want to enter. So lastly, the important considerations here are the cultural implications, as we discussed in Calc class. Being able to understand different cultures is crucial to a global business strategy. And so the data gives us a quantitative assessment of the suitability of the market, but a qualitative understanding of the cultural use of vodka in each nation is important when we want to determine whether or not 73 Distillery can effectively capture market share. So, Russians often pair their local dishes with vodka. It's part of the family culture growing up. You always drink vodka, and it's considered a healthier option than whiskey in Russia. So cultural factors are also important in the Polish economy, and Polish people consider themselves sophisticated drinkers and are really picky when it comes to their vodka. So 73 Distillery will have to consider their position and how they want to enter this in a competitive sense, in a cultural sense, in order to be able to effectively capture market share. And we'll take it on to the next portion of the presentation. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Thompson Murray, and I'm going to be discussing Gentilly 73's Gentilly Gin and exporting it to Spain. First, we'll take a look at the macroeconomics of Spain. If you look at the graph at the top right, this shows a list of countries ranked in the highest gin consumption as a total. And you'll see United States is number 1 there, with Spain right behind them in number 2. And then if you look at the chart at the bottom right, this shows the country rankings for gin consumption per capita, where Spain is actually number 1 and way ahead of the rest of the field. Interesting to note here that the United Kingdom, which is known for its gin and tonics, is actually only 4th on this list, and the United States is 7th. Moving on to Spain's GDP, as of 2019, the GDP was $1.98 trillion. And as you can see in the graph at the top right, that there was steady growth from 2016 through 2019. And going forward, they expect an annual growth rate of 1.95%. Top exports in Spain are pharmaceuticals, agricultural goods, and wine. And the top imports for the country are consumer goods, fossil fuels, and machinery. Next, we'll look at Spain's population and forecasted growth. As you can see in the chart on the right, Spain's population as of 2021 was just over 47 million people. And with steady growth over the next 5 years, there's an expectation that the population will grow to just over 48 million through 2026. Next is the gin market in Spain. The chart on the right shows the market size and the growth of that market. As of 2021, the gin market was worth just under $800 million. And with steady growth each year through 2025, there's an expectation that the market size will grow to over $1.2 trillion. Next, we'll look at retail sales. This chart on the right shows gin brands ranked by the number of drinkers in Spain as of 2019. You'll see some of the notable brands there. Beefeater is by far the most popular brand in Spain, followed by Seagram's, Tanqueray, Bombay, some notable gin brands that we recognize in the United States. And lastly, I just want to look at the import considerations for Spain. Spain has 5 major ports: Algeciras, Valencia, Barcelona, Bilbao, and Castellón. Algeciras is by far the biggest in Spain. It's also the 3rd biggest in the Mediterranean and the 9th biggest in the world. So they have capabilities for lots of imports. Additionally, Spain is the 2nd largest importer of gin in the world. They control 10.2% of all imports of the world, and their value of all gin imports is $151 million. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tommy Piglia, and I'm going to talk about what market we should try to enter with our Black Pearl rum, which is India. First, I'd like to touch base on a few facts about India's economics. It is the fastest growing economy in the world. It has a GDP of about $2.87 trillion per year. But also on the other hand, it's also one of the poorest countries in the world. There's high financial inequality. In 2019, the top 1% of the population earned 20% of the country's total income. Wealth distribution numbers are even worse, being that the richest 10% own 81% of the country's total wealth. This slide is just a quick slide on the population. As you can see, India's current population is 1.4 billion people, and it's forecasted to reach 1.5 billion people by 2026. The next slide covers the rum market within India. The top graph shows how much alcohol Indians have drank in the past 5 years. Collectively, the country drank around 6.5 billion liters of alcohol in 2020. Over a third of India's population drinks alcohol regularly, while 11% drink alcohol multiple times per week. When you take into account the population, that's 462 million and 154 million people, respectively. The bottom chart shows rum specifically. As you can see, India is the world's largest consumer of rum, with over 400 million liters of rum per year. This is twice the amount of the second place, which is United States, who come in at 200 million liters of rum per year. This slide goes over rum's retail sales in India. Rum sales have increased 11% every year between 2015 and 2019, but this growth slowed down to 6% in 2020 to 2021, which is probably due to COVID. But regardless, in 2020, there was still $1.3 trillion spent on rum, and this is expected to raise to $1.8 trillion by 2025. Next slide just goes over a few of the competitors who already have a footprint within India. The first one's Old Monk, which is India's rum, so it's pretty popular there. Bacardi, India is actually Bacardi's second largest market behind the US. They sold 1.7 million cases in India in 2019, and then Captain Morgan, Malibu, and McDowell's. And finally, this last slide goes over some considerations to think of when importing spirits into India. The spirit industry is highly regulated in India. These regulations can vary from state to state and impact volumes, price, and means of distribution. There are licenses required to store, distribute, and retail alcohol. The distribution portion is highly regulated. The government can control pricing in some areas. They can also put quotas or limits on the quantity that you can sell. These regulations make it slightly difficult to enter the market, but I think the pros definitely outweigh the cons. The population growing and urbanization rapidly spreading, which leads to higher paying jobs and more disposable income. Weighing these factors along with Indians' rum appreciation makes it a good market to enter. Now I'll hand it off to Jen to discuss whiskey and bourbon.
Okay, moving on to Irish Channel whiskey and Bywater bourbon. Spain and Japan are the biggest consumers of bourbon, while India is the biggest consumer of whiskey. Spain is one of the largest economies in the world, with a 1.36 trillion GDP. Even though the 2007-2008 recession and the 2000s property recession, Spain has seen a strong growth in its economy. Unfortunately, Spain is heavily indebted, with its public debt being 99% of its GDP. To help, Spain has invested in infrastructure to help grow industries. Valencia is the 5th busiest port in Europe, which is also the biggest port in the Mediterranean. The major industries in Spain are agriculture, tourism, energy, and manufacturing industries, and also has the second longest high-speed railway. In 2020, Spain saw a severe recession because of COVID-19, but has rebounded as foreign and domestic demand rises. Spain's economy is expected to grow 6.6% in 2021. Japan has a historically strong economy by adopting Western technology and developing itself into a major industrial power by the 20th century. By the 21st century, Japan was a major exporter of industrial products. Their economy consists of a large private sector and a small public sector. The major industries are manufacturing, mining, and construction, with services such as retail, financial, and tourism contributing to the biggest percent of its GDP. Agriculture, including fishing and forestry, are the smallest part of Japan's GDP at 2%. However, with COVID-19, Japan's economy fell 4.8% in 2020, which was its first decline since 2009. Even with the decline, Japan saw a small rebound in late 2020 with its consumption and exports, which shows that its economy is on a slow but steady increase, with its GDP still sitting at 5.082 trillion. India is the second most populous nation with a 2.87 trillion GDP. Their economy is very diverse and fast growing, but based on income and gross national product per capita, it is also one of the poorest countries. Economic growth is from their services, but agriculture employs the most workers. India is the main center for business outsourcing services, software works, and information technology services. Another main industry is the film industry, Bollywood, which is based in Mumbai. The top 3 trade partners are the United States, United Arab Emirates, and China, while the top 3 exported goods are precious stones and metals, industrial machinery, and oil and mineral fuels. Unfortunately, COVID-19 hit India hard, especially with the second wave. However, it is estimated that India's GDP will grow around 9% from 2021 through 2022. However, downsides remain for all of these countries. The health crisis is still an issue, the tourism industry is still shaky, and unemployment is persistent. Looking at the population and forecasted growth, Spain's population is 47.3 million people and expected to grow to 48.07 million by 2026, as shown in the top graph. Japan's population is 125.7 million people and expected to slowly decline to 124.5 million in 2023, as shown on the graph on the right. Lastly, India's population is 1.09 billion and expected to have continued growth to nearly 1.64 billion by 2050, but then expected to decline. Moving on to the market, the alcoholic drink market is almost 1.6 billion in 2021 and is expected to grow annually by 10.03%. On average, one person spends about $206 a year on alcohol, and by 2025, 27% of volume consumption and 43% of spending will be attributed to out-of-home consumption, such as bars and restaurants. In terms of volume, alcoholic drinks are expected to hit 322,000 milliliters by 2025, and in 2022, alcoholic drinks will show a volume growth of 6.9%. On average, one person will consume about 38 liters a year. Spain and Japan are the leading countries that import bourbon from the United States, as shown in the graph. Spain imported 88 million worth of American bourbon, while Japan imported 66 million worth of bourbon. For whiskey, India imports about 300 million worth of American whiskey. Spain's bourbon market is expected to reach 2.74 billion in retail prices by 2025. In 2015, the market was just 1.98 billion. Japan's bourbon market is expected to reach 1.1 billion by 2025. Social media plays a critical role in spreading awareness about bourbon in Japan, as well as the rising amount of bars at home and interest in mixology. For whiskey, India's whiskey market is expected to reach 25.71 billion by 2025, which has severely increased since 2015 when it was just 11.03 billion. In order for 7-3 Distillery to reach Spain, Japan, and India, there has to be easily accessible ports for the alcohol to arrive. The top 2 Spanish ports are the port of Algeciras and the port of Valencia. Japan's top 2 ports are the port of Nagoya and the port of Kobe, while the top 2 ports in India are the Mumbai port and the Kandla port. 7-3 Distillery has competition in Japan with Four Roses, Buffalo Trace, Evan Williams, and Wild Turkey. In Spain, Jim Beam, Four Roses, Jack Daniels, and Bulleit are the main competitors. In India, Jack Daniels is the top-selling American whiskey, followed by Johnnie Walker, 100 Pipers, and Black Dog. There are still some important considerations. The whiskey and bourbon categories are getting larger and larger every year. More spirit companies have arrived on the scene in the last few years than they have in the last 20. The trend of premiumization is strongly increasing as consumers are wanting more alcohol options for mixed drinks and to just drink neat. However, 7-3 Distillery has a strong chance of succeeding in these international areas.
So now that we've explored these different global markets for 7-3 Distillery as potential new markets for export of their products, we wanted to look at some recommendations and consider that 7-3 Distillery could not actually expand immediately into all of these markets. So our primary recommendation is that 7-3 Distillery target 2 countries for initial global expansion. Those 2 countries would be Spain for gin and bourbon and India for rum and whiskey. And there are some really useful advantages to choosing this strategy. The major one is that they are leading global consumers of 2 spirits categories each, which were just outlined. They both are growing population centers. Of course, India is expected to grow much more rapidly over the next several years versus Spain, but neither is expected to decline in population. And at the same time, physical location is really important for 7-3 Distillery to consider exporting their products. If they pick 2 different countries that are in completely different parts of the world, then they spread their risk. For instance, if there were new regulations instituted in the EU that might affect Spain, not having all of their global market within the EU means that they would be able to rely more heavily on their secondary market at that point of India, and vice versa. Same thing with other challenges that might come up related to geographic locations, such as natural disasters. So spreading around that risk and making sure that when one market does not perform as well, there's another market that could perform well would be a really important piece for a new market entry globally for 7-3 Distillery. And then lastly, this would actually provide them the opportunity to globally launch 5 of their 7 products, even though they would just be targeting 2 different countries. And that's because there are 2 gin products. And across the 2 countries, of course, we saw that there were 4 different categories that would probably perform well. So this should provide 7-3 Distillery with a lot of really great insights very quickly. And that would be able to help them as they try and grow the market globally into maybe other countries. So some final considerations: there will be regulatory challenges, especially as outlined with India. There's quite a process there on exporting spirits products into India. But this could also provide some really useful learning experience. As 7-3 Distillery learns how to navigate these sorts of regulations, they would be much more prepared to launch in other countries that might also have similar regulations. And then that brings us to these other identified markets, which might make great secondary launches. And so as 7-3 Distillery looks forward, they should make sure that this initial launch provides them the ability to gather a lot of data and to really rapidly learn and create efficiencies. And then they would be able to consider launching into secondary markets after that point. So that is our final recommendation for 7-3 Distillery.